everyone, welcome back to the consumer behavior and fashion class, and we are on the week 6 now. We are doing bi-weekly project. This is individual project to know better about your specific one consumer, okay? So we have talked pretty much about their individual characteristics and their social context and the social environments which might influence their behavior in certain ways, okay? And we have talked about the consumer observation techniques to unveil their hidden or unmet kind of needs that you can witness or you can observe, and then you're gonna come up with your study question. Okay, so what would you like to study more about your specific consumer? So that study topic should be relevant to you, both of you and your consumer. That is your consumer's ideas and thinking about certain products or the services or their behavior itself. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about how consumer interview is so important and crucial to understand better about their thoughts. Okay, so we're gonna listen to their thoughts, because consumer interview technique is the tool for you to better understand about their thinking. Okay, all right, so for this week we're gonna talk about some terms like perception, cognition, and emotion, attitude, all that kind of your responses and your consumer's responses which reflect somebody's behavior and how they think about their behavior as well. All right, so today we're going to talk about your interview topic or what you're going to study about, and then what your consumer think about their purchase itself, or their clothing selection, or their behavior itself. So it depends on the study question that you might come up with. Okay, so it is 100% depends on you what you're going to study about, and then you're going to come up with a couple of up to 5 like interview questions that you're gonna actually ask during the interview. So it is very conversation like and very casual kind of interview. The reason why is you are interviewing your close friend or yourself, so you don't need much questions. Okay, so you have your single study question, what you want to study about this consumer specific behavior or certain choices, or their any kind of activities related to their behavior, consumption behavior activities. And then you're going to choose the major question that what you might be interested in and your consumer might be interested in. All right, so today we're going to go deeper to talk about how to understand somebody's thoughts. Okay, so let me introduce a little bit about what you're doing for this individual project. Okay, all right, so I've talked pretty much about your observation and how to do the observation and what you're going to do for this observation process, and then you're going to come up with your idea that where, when, and how is your consumer is behaving in certain ways, and what kind of unmet needs and difficulties or problems they might face while they're making the clothing consumption decisions. All right, so you're gonna come up with their ideas, their complaints, and their difficulties, and then you're gonna decide how you're gonna do your study, further develop your study to understand how and why your consumer are being satisfied in certain ways or in dissatisfied in certain other ways. All right, so you're gonna come up with your phrase problem recognition. You're gonna recognize the problem of your consumer, the difficulties that your consumer might face. All right, so you're gonna come up with your own idea when and where and how and why your consumers are experiencing certain kind of feelings or thinking in their mind. Okay, so this consumer interview step is to listen to their thinking in their own language. Okay, so you're gonna go deeper, go closer to listen to what is happening in their environments, in their consumption environments, consumption context and situation. You're gonna listen to what is happening, and you're gonna try to understand why and how to solve these problems. Okay, so you might thinking of any kind of suggestions that you can give to the industry and the brand or the company, but at the same time, you can give your suggestions to your consumer, your friend, or to yourself to moderate and change certain steps of your decision-making process for fashion consumption. Okay, so you're gonna come up with your idea how to make your consumers' decision-making journey even more satisfactory. So you're gonna come up with many different ideas, but you're gonna come up with how your consumers are responding or thinking over the ideas that has been suggested by you. All right. Okay, let me introduce one example case of your friend, your classmate Ellie's. Okay, so Ellie is taking this class with you for this semester, and she did some observation, accompanied shopping of her friend who is living a very well managed life, waking up in the morning like 6 a.m. every morning and writing up the what to do list in the morning. So I'm gonna do this, that, and well planned and specified herself as very rational and logical and disciplined kind of person. But when she went for shopping with Ali, and she actually being very emotional and impulsive to make lots of stuffs. Okay, so after the purchase, and she felt a regret, and that was Ellie's study question. What kind of this inconsistency is going on? Because her individual trait and decision-making styles for many different important other things are telling that she is rational, logical person. But in case of this fashion shopping, things are getting different. So Ellie wants to study why she is behaving like that. So in that case, you're gonna come up with what is happening and why she became so impulsive in purchasing clothing and fashion products for this kind of situation. And you're gonna can have possibly intervene her behavior in a positive way. It's not just about to change their behavior. So you cannot be a doctor to change somebody's behavior, but you can ask you can come up with some suggestions and advice to make her think twice and mindfully to better think of their clothing purchase decision even more rational, or the consumption behavior which might make sense to understand about her own behavior. Okay, so that was the study question. In that case, you're gonna come up with your suggestion to help her and think different way, think slowly, think twice, or writing up the wish list for your shopping list at this time. So I have, inspired by Ellie's case, I have brought this example of the Confessions of Shopaholic. That is the movie that has been released in 2009. Very old movie, but it has been pretty much referenced by the fashion studies and scholars to discuss impulsive shopping. So she's explaining that why did you make that kind of impulsive purchase while doing shopping. So she explained like, because when I shop, the world gets better. Okay, so that's very emotional kind of explanation about her behavior. But in that case, you're gonna come up with your in-depth interview. What do you mean by the word gets better? Okay, and you're gonna try to understand better about her perception, her cognition, and her emotion and attitude about her lives, and how the happiness could be finally achieved through her fashion purchase like behavior and choices and the selections. So that was how they could like revise somehow how to make them think differently to come up with more satisfactory kind of decision. Okay, so how to make their future decision being even more satisfactory is it could be your question, what you're going to study about. So you, as a very close person of your self, you are not a fashion brand of hers or the industry, the profit-oriented industry, which is intriguing consumers to purchase more, to promote their new items with like nice like campaign and nice languages to persuade your consumers certain ways. But you are taking your position as an attorney of your agent, as a very close person for your consumer or yourself. So you're gonna come up with your ideas and thinking about how to make this clothing purchase decision even more satisfactory in the future, right? So you're gonna go deeper to look into their thoughts. What is the value that he put? Like the word gets better. In that case, you're gonna come up with your study questions to understand better about her wording, like her language, to pursue certain kind of values and happiness in her lives. Okay, so you're gonna make them think and describe about their behavior itself or the purchase decision itself, and then you're gonna come up with your suggestions for giving to your consumer. At the same time, to give your suggestion to the fashion industry in a broader perspective. All right. So we are doing this study to make your consumer being satisfied. Satisfaction is one example of one's attitude. I'm satisfied. I'm not satisfied. That is one way to express your attitude on certain products or just services. So if you see the diagram below here, you can see the stimuli, and you can see the circle of attitude, and you can see the mystery box in between. All right, so the stimuli is the fashion brand's products or services that has been presented to your consumer, and then you're gonna work actively as a consumer agent. You're gonna actively to formulate your perception, cognition, feeling, emotion, and then you're gonna come up with your attitude to evaluate by yourself that you're satisfied or is unsatisfied. Is that pleasing? Is that pleasant? And those kind of attitude, positive or the negative attitude. So if you are taking the industry's point of view, they'd like to change your attitude in case you're having very negative attitude about certain brands. The brands will like do their best to change your attitude in certain ways. So they'll come up with their stimuli, like their new products or the new messaging or the new information about the products or the new campaign, advertisement, events and promotions and discounts, and all the possible stimuli will be presented to you. But the mystery box of the consumer is saying that you are not passive, a kind of object which is just receiving the stimuli stimuli as it is, but you are having your own thinking. So you are going to be cognitive, so have your own cognition, your beliefs and your thinking about that stimuli, and that is going to make your attitude in certain way. All right. So in social science, attitude is defined as a settled way of thinking or feeling. What they mean by settled way is it is hard to be changed. It is because it is settled a kind of way. All right, so a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something. So typically one that is reflected in one's behavior. So indirectly or directly, your attitude is influencing your behavior, your future behavior in certain ways. Not every possible ways, but it cannot be like attitude cannot change your behavior like for most of the cases, but the real thing is it is influencing your behavior in certain ways, and your behavior itself is reflecting your attitude, positive or the negative or in between kind of attitudes for your clothing selection. So the consumer attitude in your textbook, like consumer behavior textbook, and it is defining your consumer behavior as learned predispositions. Predisposition means your traits, your tendency, so your ways of doing certain things. Okay, so your traits, like your like learned kind of traits, then might like the stimuli itself is educating consumers to behave in certain way, and that way to have, to perceive, to have certain cognition about certain things. So that is pretty top down kind of approach to understand the consumer behavior, like in general or in a like statistics and in the field of the typological sciences. So that is the general understanding about consumers' attitude being consistent all the time, and favorable or unfavorable to a given object or the fashion products is not to be easily changed. So that is what they think about how to change the consumer attitude on certain products is really hard, but at the same time that means it is possible with a new kind of stimuli, a new kind of devices to handle consumers to think in different way, to see the phenomena or the stimuli in different ways, right? Let's talk more about the consumer perception, okay? So consumer's mystery box, okay? So the stimuli that will be presented to your consumer, and we are gonna receive the external stimuli through our 5 senses: our eyes, our ears, and the nose, mouth, and the skin. So visual is the most important like component of the visual, like the sensory of your sensory 5 senses, because clothing itself is very self-expression, and it is telling pretty much about one's personality. So the visual part, how it looks, is telling pretty much about your perception about certain clothing. Yeah, but the smell as well, and the texture, and the hand, how soft and how rough it is influencing the consumer's decision in many different ways. But we cannot calculate like 80% I'll be influenced by my eyes and 20% I'll be influenced by nose, and we cannot calculate, and we cannot like make any kind of assumption on how much we're being influenced by certain kind of stimuli, sensory observing like points. But here, as it has been defined by this field, the perception, consumer perception, is the process by which an individual selects, organizes, interprets the stimuli in different ways. Okay, so we select certain stimuli because there are so many different kind of stimuli. If you look into the clothing piece or the accessories, lots of stimuli, smell, mouth, and how it tastes, and how how it looks, and those kind of all different stimuli points cannot be like witnessed by the consumers. Consumer choose. Okay, so consumer selects and organize. Okay, so this part it looks okay, and that part that is not visually appealing, and that part so organized in certain ways. So consumers are, if they recognize or don't recognize, they organize to rationalize their selection, their clothing like behavior, their purchase behavior being consistent all the time. So the keeping the consistency in consumers decision making is very important, because I was satisfied, or I was looking into this part of clothing for in this situation, but if I act differently for another situation, I cannot explain my behavior by myself. In that case, people are feeling the sense of discomfort. Okay, so they'd like to keep their consistency by making their selections, and then we are going to interpret the stimuli in one's very meaningful way and conceptual ways to make a coherent picture in your own language. So people describe their stimuli perception in their own language. Okay, so they could because people are using their languages to describe how they feel, how they think. Okay, so the way we are doing this consumer interview is to make them describe their choice and their selections in certain ways. So we're going to continuously ask why questions, why that is important, why did you choose that for the first, and those kind of questions will help them to describe their choice in their own language, right? This is very traditional kind of model, which is describing the buyer behavior. Okay, so they're not using consumer behavior, the word like consumer, because consumer has broader meaning, that you're gonna buy that, use that, and dispose that. So consumer is having a broader kind of a range to explain the consumer's behavior in every possible steps, but they have focused on the buyer purchasers behavior. So they have like theorized this framework, the how people are making their purchase decision and how they make purchase after all. Okay, so that was pretty much kind of a myth of traditional consumer behavior model. Okay, so they have talked about the stimuli itself is the passion products itself and the services itself is on, and the first step, the stimuli itself is causing consumers awareness and their perception, cognition, feeling. So that is on the first column. Okay, so the characteristics of the products, like the quality, price, and every possible characteristics of the products and the services, and all the social influences, like your family members, media, and the group members, and the social kind of ethics or the ideas prevalent in your relevant society and your community is influencing consumers' perceptual construct. That means you're gonna make your perception, you're gonna select which stimuli you're gonna pay focused on which stimuli you're gonna put your attention on, and you're gonna put your attention, you will select whether to respond to the stimuli or not. Okay, and you're going to interpret in your own language to that stimuli. And then if you think that your information you got from your stimuli is not enough, in that case, you're going to continue to move on to the next step. The next step is called the learning construct. Consumer will need and pursue seeking for more information to make your purchase decision even more rational and relevant. So they are to seek for what others are thinking about and what the industry is describing about that specific products or services. And then you're gonna make your decision to have your attitude being positive enough to make a purchase. In that case, you're gonna move on to your final step to make attention, having certain attitude, and you're gonna have the purchase intention, and your purchase intention will drive you to purchase those certain products. That is very logical kind of flow, systemic kind of flow of consumer purchase decision making. That was very traditional kind of theoretical framework to understand better about traditional consumer behavior. All right. Okay, this is very famous theory developed by Fishbein and Arjun in 1975, and they have labeled this theory of reasoned action. That means consumers are making rational kind of reasoned decision all the time. So when they're making purchase, they are come up with all the possible information, stimuli information, and they evaluate all the possible options, organize and put values and put their standards of expectancy and their needs and desires all reflected on your beliefs, on your behavior, on your certain behavior, and you're gonna go ahead and listen to others' opinion of your reference others, your important others, media, and all the possible information search will going on to make rational decision, and then your motivation to come up with certain attitude on your purchase decision. So you're gonna have a positive emotion and positive thoughts about your purchase on certain items and certain services. In that case, you're gonna make your decision by reflecting all the subjective norms of the society and your community, and you're gonna come up with your intention to make a purchase. If you have an intention to make a purchase, then you're gonna go ahead and make a purchase. Okay, so that is very unidirectional kind of one way like reasoned kind of action, because consumers want to explain rationally about their decision. So that was their premise. People want to be consistent with their idea, their attitude, with their behavior, their certain purchase decision and their purchase behavior. So their intention, attitude, intention, and your behavior will be on the same line. So you cannot you can move over on this part and that part. That is we will called as your continuous information searching and continuous decision making, but that is going circular. But after all, if you are viewing one possible like your decision making journey, that is unidirectional. That is significant finding, because people like researchers or the marketers really wanted to be sure to make certain about why people are making certain decision and making certain purchase. So that was mainly used to make prediction of consumer behavior, to predict how individual consumers will behave based on their pre-existing attitude and pre-existing behavioral intention that is formulated by certain stimuli and your beliefs, value, expectancy, and that was called a very reasoned kind of process, systematic kind of process of consumers could be witnessed through their consumption choices and their decision making and behavior, purchase behavior. After all, that was their general finding, and that was very influential because people wanted to understand, analyze consumer behavior in a logical and rational ways, right? Okay, this is the second and revised, modified version of Theory of Reasoned Action by the same author, Fishbein and Eisen, and that was called Theory of Planned Behavior. Okay, so you can see one concept on the bottom of this diagram. You can see perceived behavioral control. That is one very new kind of concept they added on this theory because they could not explain. Some consumers are having certain intention for purchase. I really want to buy that clothes. Those kind of intention. Those intention cannot be reflected. You can not see the unidirectional kind of one directional influence to have them, to make them to behave in certain ways. So if you'd like to make a purchase, that means you're having certain kind of intention, purchase intention, you have to go ahead and make a purchase. That is called reasoned action. So people can understand their action in a rational way. So that was the premise of this model, but they could not explain. There are some consumers in the real world, they have certain intention to make a purchase of certain clothing, but they don't make the purchase. After all, eventually they don't make a purchase. So this model cannot explain a consumer's general behavior. That means this theory cannot be useful to understand better about consumer behavior. So they decided to add a new kind of concept, which is called perceived behavioral control. Okay, so that is the concept that is talking about people are having their control to behave in certain way and that way, but there could be some people who cannot control their behavior, like children of one certain very conservative parents. In that case, the children cannot make their decision by themselves, or people who are not having enough money to purchase that clothes. In that case, they cannot have a control of their behavior. So that is perceived behavioral control. I can control my behavior in certain ways. So that was very sad, but that is one concept they added on their previous model to better understand about consumers' rational behavior. Okay, so this theory of reasoned action and planned behavior is getting lots of criticism, especially nowadays, because this model cannot explain contemporary today's consumer behavior. However, this theory has been widely used, and if you look up the article which has used this model to write a research paper, you can find thousands of research paper which is using this model to understand and predict a consumer. So to understand better about the series of consumers' motivation, intention, and purchase making behavior. So that was kind of like very organized, systematic kind of ways to systematically understand consumer behavior. But But the theory assumes that people are rational, but people are not actually that rational when making choices. And they ignored the unconscious motivations of the consumers that nowadays scholars are thinking more importantly, and they have ignored individual characteristics of the consumers like personality, lifestyles, and everything, which might be considered even more importantly nowadays. But during 70s and 80s, while this kind of study, like a theoretical model of consumer behavior, were prevalent in those days. In those ages, the survey study was prevalent. Nowadays, consumer interview is telling much more deeper and rich kind of information about the consumer, will be like explained more deeply and could be described in their own language. That is how it could possibly like solve those kind of limitations and the problems of this kind of research approach. Like it is ignoring lots of unconscious motives, and it cannot clearly define all the concepts they have presented, like perceived behavioral control. What are they? Is that actual behavioral control? They could not fully explain about the perceived behavioral control because that is really hard to measure, like using the survey format. So that is why we need consumer interview we cannot generalize our findings, but this kind of model is explaining the consumers in a general way to generalize consumer behavior. But nowadays, we are all having different value, perceiving different ideas. That is why the consumer groups are getting more micronized. In that case, it is better to understand consumer by taking the method of consumer interview, right? Okay, let me introduce a little bit about this famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow, okay, written by Dr. Daniel Kahneman, who has received the Nobel Economics Prize in 2002. That was kind of news in the field of economics because Daniel Kahneman is a very famous psychologist, not an economist, a psychologist, but he did lots of studies about human behavior, decision making, and how emotions are working, and how to intrigue consumers and think slow. Because lots of mainstream economists and until 2002, they strongly believe that human beings are very rational and economic, like Homo economicus. They believe the idea of Homo economicus. That means people are making economically very rational kind of decision makers. That means they are gonna think about all the risk they could take by choosing certain things and all the benefits they might possibly get by choosing certain things. So they are making a very rational kind of decision when they're making important choices. So that was the mainstream economists were strongly believed. But Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist from Israel, has explained that people are having two functional system in their brain to work and to activate their system in two different ways. And the half of it is called System 1. And System 1 is called as very intuitive and instinctive kind of system. That means you're not going to make a rational decision. You're just behave according to the ways that you behave in previous days. Like if you are making very routinely or kind of ritual kind of decision. So what you're going to wear for today, and if you if you need a certain new clothes for this coming spring, and if you're not very interested in fashion, in that case, your decision making will take the system 1. Okay, so very intuitive, like instant and instinctive, a kind of choice, irrational and unconscious and fastly working, associative and autonomic, very autonomous kind of process, and a very quick and easy kind of decision making will be done in that case. But if you're putting significance on your decision, in case if consumers recognize that that is important decision, then your system 2 will be activated to think again, to think slowly. Okay, so they pay attention and put your energy and all the efforts to think differently. So they take effort slowly, logically, rationally, and very indecisive kind of making, rational decision making will be done by activating your system 2. So in case you can see on the picture right up here, the red carpet drawn for the safety of the children. That was the idea of Daniel Kahneman. In that case, the government or the people who are caring about children's safety can make the drivers to think slowly by put any those kind of red yellow zone will make them think slowly, because they could catch the driver's attention that, oh, yellow zone. So that is kind of new and a very unusual kind of stimulus. A stimulus will be activate the driver's system 2 to think twice. Okay, so that was kind of findings of Daniel Kahneman, and I'm gonna, for the next class, I'm gonna introduce many of his psychological experiments to think consumers in a different ways. All right, so in case this clothing is well made and it is good for the environment and good for the society and good for you as well, and they'd like to put any stress, any kind of importance, significance on this product, and it has a better way to display their products in certain ways. So that was what Daniel Kahneman pointed out and talked with stress. So let me explain one example of the brand Patagonia's "Don't Buy This Jacket." This is a newspaper ad, a full-page newspaper ad placed in 2011 during the Black Friday weekends, and lots of people consider to purchase new clothing and discounted clothing, and consumerism and the culture of consumerism was strongly recommended by the media during those days. And it was Patagonia's strategy, their strategy, marketing strategy, to address the issue of consumerism, to think twice, to make some the consumers to be mindful, thoughtful, to think twice of this consumerism culture prevalent in 2011. Okay, so they admit that with every piece of clothing they produce, thus environmental harm and environmental damage could be made on the resources from the earth that cannot be replaced anymore, like the water uses and lots of toxic kind of materials used to harm the environment itself. And they wanted consumers to see this ad and make them think twice, think slowly before making their purchases. Okay, so if there is a consumers needs, they'd like to listen, and then they wanted to make sure the product is thoughtfully produced by taking these steps. So this ad and this kind of promotion aligned with their works and their purpose for the environmental change until now. So their consistent and sustainable kind of approach to make consumers to think slowly really worked on those days and until now, right? Okay, let me introduce this book, Absolute Value, okay, which is criticizing pretty much about the fashion consumption values that has been labeled and explained by the fashion marketers and industry, but it is saying that there is an absolute value which is like prioritize all the other values that people will consider, but that could be a absolute that will contribute to the society or to the people in their like hidden needs. They cannot recognize living in this consumerized world. Okay, so they cannot recognize that, but they are perceiving certain kind of values like life goals and the life values they perceive in their when they're making very important choices, like for your like very important others and for your own sake, but which is considered as absolutely important when making decisions. But those values cannot reflected on your fashion consumption in some way. So you're not thinking deeply or slowly enough to think about the result that might cause to the society and the environment with your purchase of your fashion items. So in that case, we're gonna go deeper to how to satisfy your consumers by not just meeting their superficial or their unmet needs. They cannot they just pop up the all the possible needs they're popping up in their minds are the activation of their system one. In that case, you're gonna make them to think deeply about their cognition and their the minds, like mindful thoughtful kind of ideas related to your fashion consumption, and which is associated with your behavior, consumption behavior or purchase behavior. In that case, you're gonna come up with better ideas to satisfy their unmet kind of needs. So what you're like to do through this consumer interview process is to listen to their opinions, not just an opinion specific to fashion choices, but you're gonna broaden your views to understand about their views to see the world or see the absolute values they like perceive as important in their lives. Okay, so for this coming Thursday, we are going to talk more about the cognition, emotion, and how to do the consumer interview, consumer in-depth interview. So I'm going to tell you the techniques, how to let them talk and talk deeply about their thoughts. All right. So thank you so much for listening.